Hey y'all, here's the deal today. We're going to do a mini viewer submitted encounter marathon. I have 6 stories here we're going to pack into this video. I don't know how long it's going to be, but they're all, I have a stack of these and I get 4 or 5 a day. The stack I have now is about 2 inches thick, and we need to get these done. I'd love to do some of my stories, and I have 2 or 3 written that are ready to go, but it's just fair. People are writing these down and sending them in, and I'm going to concentrate on that for the next couple of weeks. And they're all good. They're really great. So we have 6 today. I think 3, maybe 4 of these. One person is anonymous, so but I think it's a woman, and which would make 4 of these videos submitted by women, which I think is really cool. And I'd like to say, guys, don't get your feelings hurt. But these women, you girls, you write a lot better than the dudes. Man, it's like so much easier to read your encounters than some of these guys. And I'm not being critical of the guys. I'm just saying, whoa, some of you girls can write. Thank you. And so anyway, the first story is submitted by a woman, and it scared the crap out of me when I read it. And it's just really good. It's a good short story. And then we'll get through them. When we get to the last one, you will not believe what happens with the last one. It is such a cool ending to this story. You've got to hang all the way through and listen to every bit of it. All right, let's get to the stories. Here we go. Okay, this first encounter is sent to me by Patricia, and she writes, I grew up in the town of Wyoming, West Virginia. Where I grew up, there was nothing but mountains for miles in every direction. For years, they didn't even have street lights on the corner. During that time, I had many encounters with Bigfoot. It was around 1976, and I was around the age of 21, and every year when the seasons changed, me and my family would hear loud, inhuman screaming coming from the holler near the old dump. After the dump finally closed, the screaming seemed to be more frequent from the holler near my home. I remember the first night I heard it. It made my blood run cold and my hair stand up on end. I would often find myself staring out the window with every light in my home out, trying to see what creature was making the sound, but to no avail. One night I was sitting in bed, and in the middle of the night I spotted something coming from the holler. The moon was full, so I could easily make out 4 large figures coming into the nearby cornfield. My heart felt as if it had dropped down to my feet at that moment, and I found myself unable to move from that spot at the window, staring at their large hairy forms. They stood from around 8 to 9 feet tall and covered head to toe in long hair. My dog Red began to bark at the figures as they made their way down near my neighbor's house. I could not see what had happened as he ran over to where they had walked to. I heard his loud barking echo, followed by a loud whimpering that soon went quiet after a loud yelp. It wasn't until the morning when we found Red laying beside my neighbor's trailer with a large bite wound in his back. That following day, a news article reported that a police officer said that a Sasquatch was seen throwing rocks at him from the other side of the river. Of course, the event was later brushed off as a big hoax, most likely to keep people from panicking. But I will never forget what I saw. Even to this day, if you go up there into that area, you can still hear their loud screaming late at night. It seemed that many of the townspeople have experienced similar encounters, but many of them have grown accustomed to their presence. Thank you for listening to my story. Sincerely, your biggest fan, Patricia. Thank you, Patricia. I can just see in the moonlight those 4 creatures walking out into that cornfield. I can see it in my mind just as clear as day, and it scares me to death. And thank you for that encounter. That's a great one. Thanks. The next encounter is sent to me by Jody. He writes, Cam, I'd like to start by saying I love your channel. I listen to it on my way home from work at night to pass the time on my 70-minute drive. Several years ago, a buddy and myself would fish at Baden Lake. One evening, I was dying to go fishing, but he couldn't go, so I put the rods in the truck and off I went. I had been fishing for a couple of hours when I noticed everything had gotten very quiet and still. A couple of minutes later, I hear a rustling off to my right up on a ridge. As I'm watching to see what is going on, I hear a god-awful scream and small trees being shaken violently. Needless to say, I'm going to miss that fishing rod and tackle box. But I didn't wait around because deep down I knew what it was. I had heard the stories of the unwary forest and never went back by myself again, but I have often gone back late in the evening riding the roads through the forest looking and hoping for a glimpse of the unwary Bigfoot. Thank you, Cam, and keep up the good work. Jody, thanks. You're like one of those guys who you see something or see some kind of evidence and it just sticks in your mind and you just have to see it. You just keep going back. I know how you feel. And so anyway, thanks for that, Jody. Have a good one, brother. This encounter was sent to me anonymously. I don't know where this happened or who this is, but it's a pretty good story. I do not wish to give my name or the location where this happened, but my whole life I've hunted and fished all the time, and I thought I knew everything that lived in the woods, and I wasn't scared to be in them, but then I found something to this day makes me walk in fear. In July of 2014, my cousin and I were hunting for ginseng in the hills near my grandma's house, as we did many times, but today was different because today we went deeper than usual into the woods. I was nervous because we had heard a large black bear had moved into the area, but we figured the animal was more scared of us than we thought. When we went into the woods, everything was normal. The birds were chirping and we saw a few deer. About 2 hours later, we were very deep in the woods and we heard nothing. No birds, no bugs, nothing. And we felt as though we were being watched. As we walked, we came upon a lean-to-like structure that was very large. We stepped under it and immediately we smelled the worst stench on the planet. I've experienced rotting animals, skunks, and this was 3 times as bad. Next, we noticed a spot where something had bedded down. And then it happened. The entire structure shook. We stepped outside and saw a large stone behind it. We looked around to find where it came from, and I noticed my cousin just standing there like he was frozen, and I asked, "What's wrong with you?" And he pointed at a black mass next to a large tree stump. I had assumed it was a bear, so I grabbed a stick, threw it in its direction while yelling, "I wish it was a bear," because at the moment the creature stood up on 2 legs. It was at least 8 foot tall and had long arms, and its whole body was covered in thick, dark-colored hair. And then it let out a blood-curdling scream like something from a horror movie. I looked at my cousin, who was still frozen, and I said, "We need to go now." And we started slowly walking back to back with our arms linked, and I had my eyes trained on the beast. It screamed and shook large saplings. Once I lost sight of it. I heard twigs snapping and leaves rustling. Every once in a while we would hear grunting and growls from the thick brush. We stayed back to back for at least a mile, and then we got to familiar territory. We stopped and looked back towards where we came from, and the creature walked out of the thick leaves. It pointed towards us and growled. It was clear it did not want us there. We started backing up. It turned around and walked away. My cousin and I said we would never return to those woods, and we never have to this day. Thanks, man, for sending that in. It's pretty scary. Great encounter. Thank you. This 4th encounter is sent to me by Eric. It happens in the state of Florida, and it's pretty interesting. He writes, "I became interested in Bigfoot, Yeti, Loch Ness, and all things cryptid in the mid-1970s. Shows like Boggy Creek and In Search Of come to mind. I grew up in central Indiana in a small town about an hour from Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Dayton. I was what my family called an East Side river rat. We ran the swampy areas in the Whitewater River and played in the woods all the time. Okay, when we weren't playing baseball or football, riding bikes or in the old barn property. I know exactly what he's talking about. We always played outside. You couldn't keep us inside when we were kids. In grade school, I recall going to the library at the school and then later to the county library to find books on Bigfoot and other cryptids. So I really believed in these creatures at a young age. In the late 70s, my grandparents moved down to Florida, and we would go down there a lot when I was a young boy. I can recall playing outside and feeling like I was being watched. Numerous times we walked down toward the old sawmill, and I would just get the creeps and could not get the nerve up to explore that area. It had been shut down for a long time and was overgrown. Just a few hundred yards down the road, the swamps and the forest began. It was super thick and dark. We never really went in at all. I say this because in Indiana, I ran the woods and the river all the time, so the outdoors never bothered me. I'm just not sure if it was the creepy feeling, fear of the gators, or rattlers that kept us out, but we never went too far in those woods. During the spring of 1980 or 81, a local newspaper had some stories of the Bigfoot swamp ape in the area near my grandpa's house. The Orlando news station also had a TV report, if I recall. I mentioned to my grandpa that I thought it was true and wondered if the creature could use the old mill and the swamp areas for a home. The whole family had stayed up and I had gone to bed about 11 p.m. I stayed in a room at the front of the house by myself. I can't recall if I was awake or trying to sleep or was awakened, but I could hear a noise outside of my window. I'm guessing it was around 12 or 12:30, or in that time frame. I could tell something was walking around in the front yard. I thought it was my dad or my grandpa. I could hear different sounds, from growling, guttural noises, and snorting. I knew my family did not sound like that, but I didn't look. I wished I could have mustered the courage to look, but I was terrified. The noises only lasted about 5 or 10 minutes. I can remember hearing dragging sounds and like something touching the house. It was pacing back and forth. The sounds got louder, and then they got softer. I remember the primal fear to this day. I was so scared to look out the window, even though I wanted to. I remember just staying in bed, awake and scared. I went outside as soon as I woke up in the morning and found something interesting. This morning there were 2 large footprints in the sand pile. It almost looked like they were made by something jumping into our sand pile, feet together. The piles were a couple of feet tall and wide. I showed the tracks to my family, and they all played it off as a fluke or a neighborhood kid goofing around. I can't think of too many kids with feet that big. They all had the 5 toes and were just plain big bare footprints. I measured them with the tape, and they were 17 inches long and 8 to 10 inches across. My foot today is a 10.5 long and 4.5 inches wide, and my foot could have fit in these footprints twice. I can say I did not imagine these noises, nor the actual footprints, but I cannot say 100% sure that it wasn't a hoax or a family member kidding with me. No one ever claimed they did it. I even asked my dad a few years back. He is 77 now, and to this day he claims to have no knowledge of how the tracks got there. I even asked my grandfather when I was in college, and he says he doesn't know either. Eric, thanks for sending that in. It's perfect. The next encounter story that I have here in front of me is from Elle. And she writes, "My name is Elle, and I live out in the country about 10 miles from Atlanta, Texas, northeast Texas. I live in a wooded area, but my little house is just off of a farm to market road. Not much traffic, not many people, not much of anything but trees. My husband's family has had the land here since before the Civil War. When the time came, he and I moved here from the Texas coast, planning to live here until, well, the end. When we first moved up here, my husband was still chasing turnarounds in the refineries. I'd often be alone for weeks at a time. It was during one of those times that I began to feel as though I was being watched. At first, it scared me, so I'd get my .357 and march outside as bravely as I could and pop off a few rounds in the air. I'd go back in the house, relieved, but never quite sure I'd scared whatever it was away. The strange feeling of being watched changed after a while. I began to feel more like I was being observed. I could feel that something was out there in the dark. The dogs knew it too, I think. They would jump up and go lay in front of the door. One night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV. My hubby was up north on another turnaround, and it was just me and the dogs. Suddenly, there was a sound coming from the woods to the right of the house. This time, the dog started barking. I muted the TV, grabbed my gun, and ran to the door. I cracked it just a bit. The sound was incredibly loud, and it sounded like a scream on top of a roar, if that makes sense. It went on for at least a minute, and then silence. I slammed the door and got the dogs settled down. That night, I stayed up, sitting on the couch watching the door, my gun in hand. I was scared. I told my husband about it on the phone the next day. He laughed it off, just like he did when I'd tell him I thought something in the woods was watching me. My husband died not long after that. I was alone here full time. I frequently felt that I was being observed. It wasn't a constant feeling, but when it came on, it felt like there was a heaviness in the air. I learned to live with it, and that was that. A few months after my husband passed, my youngest son Jay and his fiancée moved up. His father had asked him to take care of me, and that's what he did. One day, not long after he got here, Jay went out to the back 40 to have some time alone, walking around in the woods he used to hunt with his dad. There's a dry creek that runs through back there. Jay started walking the creek. After a little bit, he came to a place in the creek bottom and stopped dead in his tracks. He told me something was there, but he didn't know what it was. He was so overcome by fear that he ran as fast as he could back to his truck and got the hell out of there. He's been here 2 years and has never gone back to that spot. Fast forward about 2 months, it was a beautiful black night. I went outside to soak up the peace that permeates the air here. It just engulfs you. I love that about this place. But suddenly, as I stood there, I heard that scream coming from the same place I'd heard it 2 years before. It wasn't as loud. It didn't even wake my son and his fiancée, but it was the same. I ran back inside and locked the doors. 2 weeks passed. It was just after sunset. The kids were gone, and I was getting something out of my car. I hadn't been out there for more than a minute when I heard the first scream. It had come from the same place as before. I got my stuff out of the car and headed to the house when I heard another scream coming from the woods behind the house. I froze. A few seconds later, another scream came from the first place. I waited, but I didn't hear anything else. A week or two later, my brother came up to go hunting. The first morning he was there, he geared up and headed to the back 40. He came back a few hours later. He looked disturbed. He asked Jay what the deal was with the creek bottom. He said he could feel something there. Jay asked him where he was specifically, and my brother told him. It was the same place Jay was when he took off, running in terror 2 years ago. My brother is a survivalist and a very experienced hunter who has spent half his life in the woods. He said he'd never felt that presence or that kind of fear ever before. And she writes, I'm sorry for rambling on. You're not rambling on, Elle. This is great. I know none of us have seen anything, but I am certain the big man is living here. I've told a couple of people about the screams and feeling something watching me and about the creek, and they just laugh. But I bet that if they heard some of the screams and felt some of the presence, it would wipe the smirks right off their faces. Oh, I love it when somebody says, you ought to hear what I hear. That was really good, and I assume you're still out there, Elle. Girl, be safe, stay alert. I'm sure you're fine, and I hope Jay and his girlfriend are still there with you. And enjoy those peaceful nights. You're going to be okay. I'm just almost sure of it. And I just love you for sending this in. Thank you. All right, here is our 6th and last story on this viewer encounter marathon. This story is very exciting and has a bit of mystery to it. The story was actually sent to me by Carrie Arnold over at Bigfoot Odyssey. The woman's name is Crystal, and she sent it to him. Carrie doesn't narrate viewer encounters, and he forwarded it on to me. And so I'm going to tell you Crystal's story, and it is a good one. She writes, "Hey Carrie, I've hesitated a few times when thinking about emailing y'all, but I decided to go ahead and do it. Let me start by explaining what happened to me. This happened during the summer of 1982. I was 18 years old, and I had lost my dog in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I put an ad in the local paper offering a reward, and I had an old feller call me at work to tell me he thought that he had spotted my dog coming out of the woods behind his house and eating the garbage that he and his wife tossed over their fence. He lived in the general area of where Route 47 and Interstate 77 intersect in the Parkersburg area. I asked if I could come show him pictures to make sure it was actually my dog that he had seen, and he agreed to meet. I went to his house and met him and his wife. They were very nice people. I showed him the picture, and he assured me that the dog was indeed the dog he had witnessed coming out of the woods early on several mornings. I asked him if he would allow me to camp in his woods overnight so I could be in the area the following morning in hopes to find my dog. He welcomed me to do just that. That very afternoon, I walked up into his woods through the thickest bramble and briars anyone could imagine. No one would purposely do this, but I was on a mission to find my dog. I put my dog's bed in a fairly soft area under some pine trees, and I also left my sleeping bag and a few other things there that would be sure to have my scent on them, and then I went to work. I worked at a restaurant and got off around 11:30. I drove back to his place, parked along the road, and with my flashlight I took off over his hill and behind his house to my little camping area. It was probably midnight to 12:15 when I got there, and I got all settled in. At some point during the night, I heard twigs snapping, and I opened my eyes. I'm a very light sleeper. I let my eyes adjust and looked in the direction of the noise. I didn't raise up or move much at all and remained completely silent as my eyes were adjusting. Because I was laying down, I was looking upward and could see the silhouette of someone walking towards me from the west. I had walked in from the south up into these woods. I instantly thought someone had spotted my car parked along the road. My brain was screaming to me that a crazy, murderous maniac spotted a car obviously belonging to a female, and he was coming to kill me. I can't honestly say exactly how long this figure was walking in my direction, but I do remember thinking, my God, he's a big man, so tall and huge through his shoulders. His waist seemed to be tapered in, though, and his arms were long. The way I was laying, I couldn't see all the way down his legs, though, just a little past his waist. I remember trying to make sense out of the shape of his head. It seemed to me that he was wearing a cowboy hat, but without the brim around it, making his head look like a cone. I'm horrible at guessing the distance he was when I first woke up. I'm just not sure. As he kept walking slowly towards me, he kept moving slightly from side to side and downward like he was actually looking for something. But that would be impossible for him to be looking because it was so dark and he didn't have any type of a flashlight. He came to about 40 or 50 feet or so from me and then stopped abruptly and paused just a moment and then turned left back the very same way he had come in. I was never so relieved in my life. I waited a while, listening, but never heard a vehicle start up. Never heard him coming back either, and eventually I drifted off back to sleep. Early that morning, still dark, I heard my dog's tags jingling on her collar, and I woke up and said her name, and she came running to me so excited, and I was so excited and happy to have found her. She had been missing for 6 weeks. I just started gathering my things, never even thinking about the man that had been walking in the woods, and headed back to my car. I remember looking at the clock in my car, and it was right around 4 a.m. It wasn't until sometime later that day that my thoughts returned to the man in the woods, and I had several questions. Why was a grown man walking in the woods at night acting as though he was looking for something without a flashlight? I was an 18-year-old kid and I remembered to bring a flashlight. Why was he wearing a cowboy hat without a brim? Why was it so easy for him to walk through that bramble when I was getting my clothes and hair caught on everything? Why was he coming from the west if he had truly been a man who spotted my car on the road to the south? If he had thought there was someone camping in the woods, why didn't he call out to me? Why did he stop so suddenly and turn around and leave? Does this sound like maybe Bigfoot behavior to you? Crystal, I don't know. It sounds like it to me. It sounds like something really weird to me. I don't know if you could get a good judge of the size of this thing or not. But the main thing about this story that kind of got to me is that you found your dog. Oh my gosh, you found your dog. I know you were so happy. And I'm glad you documented this experience, but mostly I'm glad you found your dog. Okay, that's going to do it for the mini viewer-submitted encounter marathon. Hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks.